Hello, I'm joined today by Richard Webb of Pattinson Auctions. How are you doing, Richard?
I'm not too bad, thank you, David. Good to see you again.
Always nice to see you. Today we decided we wanted to come at auction at a slightly different angle. And to me, it's always been that agents have struggled to sort of work auction into their offering. And the reason that I think they sometimes struggle with that is that they've always seen auction as being a competing interest to that of a regular estate agent. And you and I discussed this a couple of weeks ago. And the truth is, as an agent, one of our duties is to make it very clear to the owner all their options in disposing of a property, not just the regular sort of private treaty routes. And so the question becomes, are we as agents doing our duties if we're not really making them aware of what auction could bring to the table for them?
100%, David. And obviously, you're very clear on the Estate Agency Act of 1979 there, because it is within that about portraying to clients their, I suppose, every avenue that you have available to them in order to find a suitable sale route. Going back to the initial point you raised there of when to slip it into conversation, I think it's twofold. Speaking as an estate agent myself, who in the past has valued properties, numerous properties, and you're very much talking on the lines of the private treaty sale. The last thing a lot of agents feel, in my humble opinion, and from some of the anecdote feedback we get as well, is how to then drift it from the private treaty conversation to auction, and also are you going to start bamboozling and confusing the seller? So it's not necessarily the lack of understanding all the time. It's probably the lack of knowledge as to when to slip it into the conversation when the suitable time is. You can then move on from that in regards to, as human beings, we are all quite uncomfortable discussing things that we're not entirely clear on, in case we do get asked those tricky questions. What we try to do at Pattinson is to support our partners, and we try to give them as much education as possible, not to make them, chapter and verse everything auction, but ultimately to arm them with the tools and the responses that they ultimately could need in the sort of the heat of the moment, quick fire questions from a seller. But from that, we are there to support our partners, and it would be a case of if an agent is having a conversation with any particular seller in regards to discussing the auction aspect of selling their property, it is a case of, I will pass you on, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, to our specialists in this area. In turn, then that means the agent will pass it to us, and then we have that conversation with them. But ultimately, it's not, auction is something that people or agents shouldn't be scared of discussing. We want agents to be able to discuss it with confidence. We've got this desire to make auction a viable alternative to private treaty, and the number of transactions in the auction world has increased hugely over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And that's just not solely down to Pattinson Auction. Of course, I'm not that modest or confident to say that. We have lots of competitors in the auction space within the property industry, but with us all sort of banging that drum of what auction can deliver, not just for agents, but importantly for their clients, both sellers and buyers alike. We are seeing an upturn in regards to auction transactions, and it will become more mainstream, and it will be a topic that's going to be a lot more simple to talk about, because even the sellers will have a clearer understanding on how it works and how it operates.
So to begin to sort of usher that elephant firmly into the middle of the room now, if we look at reasons why auction perhaps has always been seen as a less than viable route in a market that has been quite punchy, is that, quite frankly, everything that comes to the market seems to be going for sort of best and final bids. People may just assume that the best price is always going to be gotten by private treaty, and to be honest with you, that's always been the struggle, that auction, and I don't know where down the line this came about, but auction became synonymous with properties that were perhaps more difficult to sell, that were perhaps not full market value because they had some sort of a a hidden secret that nobody knew. Very often these were the properties that were perhaps the uglier sisters and harder to shift for an agent, and repossessed properties, etc., etc. It became that sort of corner of the market that seemed to be a little bit darker than others. And so therefore, how can you mention auction without addressing the fact that in actual fact, there are some surprising statistics behind auction, in terms of you'd be very surprised how that compares to a regular private treaty scenario.
Spot on. You mentioned there about this almost like the dark arts, I suppose, that people consider auction to be in regards to property sales, and the stereotypical type of property that represents auction. And again, going back to what I said a moment ago, what we're trying to do, we're trying to strive to make auction a much more viable alternative, and so people shouldn't be scared of auction. Rightly or wrongly, there's a popular daytime TV show on BBC television every morning, which sort of champions the auction process, and it does quintessentially drive the narrative that it is the distressed property that is suitable for the auction route. But counterbalance that, what you also mentioned there, David, in regards to in recent months, the property market has been red hot. It's definitely been a seller's market, and lots of properties are going at top end prices. Lots of properties and agents alike are seeing best and final sealed bids on a lot of their listings. Now, with regards to best and finals / sealed bids, what is that if it's not a blind auction? We're just making the auction process much more transparent, so it's for everybody to see what's going on. Because if I could just focus on the best and final scenario for a second, best and finals is a great way to try and get the, in inverted commas, best price for the seller. But is it? Because if buyer B misses out by £5,000 on that with their bid, if they'd have known what buyer A had offered, would they have gone a little bit further into the dive a little bit further into their pockets to fork out a little bit more? The chances are possibly yes. So this is where the transparent world of auction comes into its own. We refer to the properties that have a queue of buyers for them, i.e. those desirable properties, whether it be a 3-bed semi-detached family home with beautiful extensions and bifold doors and loft extensions, etc. But where the agent knows there's going to be a queue of buyers round the block on a Saturday morning to do to accompany the block viewing. We refer to those within our little world as our hot to trot stock. And we've been championing the fact that agents should perhaps consider discussing the auction route for their clients in those particular circumstances. Why? Simply put, we can legally prepare a property for that particular client before it goes to the market. Then when the property is launched, any buyer who is interested in that property can then bid in a transparent setting in order that the seller can get the best price. But fundamentally, and more importantly, again, what you touched on, David, in regards to everyone assumes everybody wants the highest price. Some sellers want the speed and the certainty and the security, which auction can deliver and offer. So people can bid in that open environment. But when that winning bid comes in, we are exchanging contracts. So the seller has got that certainty. The agent has got that certainty in that deal has been done. Whereas best and final sealed bids, what that tends to often lead to, speaking from personal experience myself working on the high street, is knee-jerk reactions, knee-jerk decisions are made by buyers, placing offers that they probably can't afford, or they probably have a bit of buyer's remorse a day or two later, and the sale can fall through. Or speaking of how the conveyancing process at the moment, the length of time it takes to get a transaction through can take a number of, actually, I can't say weeks, months. You've got the prolonged transaction timeline, which allows perhaps buyers and sellers to have a change of heart, etc. So,
I'm going to date our recording a little bit, which is something you should never do, because then we'll have to record this again at some point, Mitchell. But we're talking today at the end of July 2022. And the reason that I think this is quite a significant fact is that right now in the marketplace, there is this sense, you can hear the walls creaking ever so slightly, and there is a sense that we're due for a change in the market. And the one thing that agents seem to sort of be coming across, and this isn't this is now more than just anecdotal. It seems to be coming across the countries that fall through rates are at an all-time high for transactions. And as the market sort of cools, this tends to happen a lot more, where the buyers suddenly realize that that shift of that balance of power between a seller's market and a buyer's market, it changes extremely quickly. And what you need is that security to sort of tie people into the transaction. So when you've got fall throughs at this sort of rate, where it can come at any point during that process. But I always say, when I'm pitching to a vendor in their living room, I might say, yeah, look, the property portals like Rightmove, Zoopla on the market, booming. You take your pick. There's loads of them out there. They're your best friend when you want to sell a house, because they're telling everybody, come and get this house. It's amazing. Come and have a look at it. But once you found your buyer, they turn into your worst enemy, because they're still telling that buyer, here's some other properties that you might like. Yeah. So the propensity, I think, for somebody's head to get turned in a digital world is much higher. But I think also taking the kind of public sentiment, cost of living crisis, all this sort of stuff that's going to get thrown at us, I think you'll see fall through rates really start to sort of go through the roof. And that's what we're hearing from agents up and down the country. And how you tie a buyer in and how you get commitment to a transaction, there are a number of different solutions out there. But truthfully, you speak to any solicitor for legal advice as to how you can best tie somebody in, they will always tell you the same thing. Nothing beats exchange of contracts legally. You can take any kind of deposit or insurance policies you want, but it's exchange of contracts that you need to get to. Surely auction delivers that in bags.
Definitely, certainly does. What we pride ourselves on is that we have a relationship with solicitors where it enables us to legally prepare any property, whether it be a residential, commercial, whatever the condition, whatever the size, wherever, etc., etc. We can legally prepare that property for sale immediately. So once a buyer is sourced and a winning bid is submitted, we can exchange contracts immediately. Now, there is two main routes through auction, which people are probably familiar with, and they are known as the conditional sale, which is otherwise known as the modern method of auction, which is not an immediate exchange of contracts. It is a financial commitment from purchasers, in regards they pay a reservation fee to secure that property, and it's a commitment to the seller from the get-go. But it's not, as you highlighted, David, and you said that solicitors have informed you, it is not that legal exchange of contracts. There is also the unconditional, which is probably what the unconditional sale, which is probably what most people are familiar with when it comes to auction, in regards to familiarization of a live auction room, paddles in the air, highest bidder wins the property, if it's met the reserve, of course, and an exchange of contracts is expected. Now, we are the forerunners of the modern method of auction, the conditional sale. We've been doing it for a number of years, more than 25 years. But the unconditional route of sale is still what we hang our hat on, probably 96, 97% of the time for our transactions, because we recognize it gives that certainty. We recognize it gives that assurance of a legal exchange of contracts, which therefore means buyer is committed to seller, seller is committed to buyer. So we recognize 100% the importance of exchanging contracts. Now, what I would say in regards to how the market is cooling, and you also recognize the fact that the fall through levels are sort of driving through the roof at the moment, this is where agents now start to think, or need to think, in regards to what conversations they should be having with sellers, not waiting till it falls through, but at the point of valuation. Having that conversation with the sellers, an honest and open, frank conversation in regards to the market is cooling slightly, the pendulum is swinging more and more in favor of the buyer. And I can resonate back to 2007, 2008, working on the high street, when we were selling houses for fun in 2007. And then, of course, we had the financial crash. And then it was almost like somebody flicked a switch and then nobody wanted to buy a house anymore. Deals were falling through left, right and center. Pipelines were falling apart. It was a torrid time for everybody. Auction will give that certainty to the agent and also to their clients. So don't be afraid. What my message to estate agents is, don't be afraid to have a conversation with your sellers to highlight what auction can deliver. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be selling for a lesser price. it does mean you're going to get that certainty. And is there a value for this? Is there a value to the seller for that certainty? And if you have that conversation, A, it makes the agent look like a much more rounded professional who's willing to understand the needs of the seller. But B, it means you've got a solution. You've got a solution to overcome the increased fall through rate that we're all experiencing currently in private treaty world.
And the other thing that is sort of dominating the headlines in private treaty world at the moment is transaction times. We're at an all-time high in terms of the length of transactions, and the longer a transaction drags on for, the larger the risk, if you like, of that sale going south anyway. And so speed very much is one of those things that agents should be relying on in order to sort of keep momentum of a sale, keep a buyer hooked into that transaction.
Yes.
And similarly, you're going to want to deliver a sale in the time frame that you promised your vendors originally. Now, there's all sorts of things being thrown at us by conveyancers left, right, and centre in terms of reasons why transaction times are not what they once were. But if you speak to people about making the sale process quicker, they'll all tell you it all happens on instruction, that you should get an effort should be made to get your buyers legally ready legally ready to sell, which means that they should, fill in their inquiry forms, that they should, in some cases, even get searches instructed so that they're there for people to look at. And really, auction's been doing that for many more years than we give it credit for.
100%. And it's that thing again with regards to the misconceptions, and that's, to a degree, I suppose, probably auction has been a little bit of a victim of its own success, because historically it is about the quick sale, and it's not just about perhaps a distressed property. It could be a distressed seller as well. There may be mitigating circumstances why the seller needs to offload that property quickly. So traditionally, it is that type of style and seller that goes to the auction route. But as I say, but with the upturn of the online auction world, which allows a much more, I suppose, fluid process and a much more accessible process. There is no need to go to a live auction room. There is no need to attend a ballroom auction anymore. It is not much different to bidding on a pair of socks on eBay, albeit there's a lot more legal safety nets in place to ensure that people can't just disappear into the ether once they've placed the bid. It's not just a case also of legally preparing the property, because once that property is legally prepared, we allow that buyers. The legal pack is a wonderful tool because it allows the buyers to run their due care and diligence, but we also allow buyer to do all that legwork which a solicitor would do normally after an offer is accepted, prior to them placing a bid. So inquiries can be raised, inquiries can be replied to, but the legal pack contains all the documentation, special conditions, the titles, searches, etc., that allows a buyer to be fully informed. So it's not just a case of looking at pretty pictures on the portal, looking at the lovely words, the flowery words that the agent has put together to illustrate this particular property for Mr. and Mrs. Client. It is about the nuts and bolts of that property, the actual fabric of that property, what makes that property tick and what makes it stand there, what makes it valid and what makes it relevant. And it allows the buyer to really, really make an informed decision, which therefore eliminates the tire kickers in the world, the buyers that probably go and view 50, 60 houses. You're getting the buyers that really want to buy this property. But what I'd also like to echo is what's good for the goose is good for the gander, because a lot of people wonder, well, what's in it for the buyer? What's in it for the buyer is the fact that, as I said, that property's legal prepared, so they know what they're buying from the off. But it also means if their bid is acceptable and is successful, they are then moving aside all other interested parties. So they cannot be gazumped. And in recent months, that's been a godsend for a lot of buyers, because it means they can secure a property. Yes, they may have been involved in a bidding war on our live bidding platform, but ultimately they've secured a property, which means that they are safe in the knowledge that they can move forward. They've exchanged contracts immediately. They've got a completion date set, because this is the other thing as well with auction. It allows sellers to dictate timelines that they can move to. When you accept an offer via a private treaty sale, estate agents will do their utmost to establish a desirable date for completion. You've already touched upon the topic, the thorny topic of the conveyancing process currently and how long it takes. with the auction world, you are setting that date from the day of exchange, so everybody is aware when completion will be taking place. So it's just it really just adds so much levels of security and transparency and assurance that it really makes me sometimes leaving scratch my head as to why do we still use private treaty. But of course we have to, because we have different
we
methods.
are guilty. We're guilty in UK agency of not putting the glamour into auction that it deserves. The Aussies are fantastic at this. The auction over there is quite a strong method of sale, and it's not seen by an owner as necessarily prejudicing their right to get the best price possible. And if anything, it creates an open bidding, very competitively open bidding process that has some finality at the end of it. And so you can walk away from that process knowing exactly what you've got out of it. And I think sometimes that if an agent were to marry their traditional marketing together with that of the auctions, then they could handle this and add every bit of as much value as they would have done. So that is to say, an agent considering going down the auction route might say, look, that's great for the auction house because they're going to get to put that in their catalog and so on. What's in it for me? I'm not getting any sort of local exposure. There's nothing to stop an agent doing all the marketing they normally do. They could do their videos, they could do their social media advertising, they could drum up as much interest as they want for the property directly and using their traditional methods. It's just that the end point of sale shifts ever so slightly, because instead of going into that sort of best and final bids process, you just transport that over to an auction. And so you've got the same thing. And I think that the agents can still get their brand exposure, they can still do their marketing, and they can still more essentially be seen to be adding value to the seller. So the last thing that we want to do as agents is introduce a solution that makes us seem redundant. And I think that's also why agents have not embraced auction, because rather than they've seen it as an us and them scenario. You either take auction or you take a traditional agent, but there's nowhere where these two things meet in the middle. And I think they do.
Spot on. And we actually champion the word we use a lot within our little world at Pattinson Auction is recognition. We're all about, with regard to our partners, giving them the recognition. We want to expand their add an extra service bow to a service string to their property bow, and auction is the way of doing that. And it is about allowing our partners to champion what is in effect their own auction outlet, their own auction arm to their business, without the need to employ additional staff, without the need to extend office space, without the need to change CRMs and software or digitalize anything, because we can supply all that for them. But everything is tailored for each and every individual partner that we work with. If an agent is on the high street and they are invited onto a valuation and they can discuss with a client the different routes of selling a property, and another agent hasn't done that, surely the client sitting in their lounge must think the agent who's offering these different routes of sale is much more, I suppose, knowledgeable, much more informed, and available to offer these additional routes, unlike the competitors. So it is key that when the agent is positioning an auction product, that they can position it as if it's their own. What we do within Pattinson, we supply as a bolt-on facility. So we're beavering away in the background. Our legs are whirring a million miles an hour to get the nuts and bolts done and to get the legal paperwork all in place, etc., etc. But it is about the estate agent. It's still the face of the auction. We're not here to take the recognition away from them. We're here to give them more recognition. So if there is a listing on one of the portals and it does say for sale by online auction, it is about that agent, and that agent is advertising auction properties. But also as well, moving one step on from that, if a business owner has 5, 6, 7 negotiators within a branch, 2 branches, whatever the case may be, and they are adopting the auction process, it means that he or she is actually educating their staff members for another angle of how to sell properties, which again means that their staff are better informed as well. They're not so spooked by the auction word, because it is just a case of getting the message out there through our partners, and we are getting there.
Nothing can beat an auction for speed or certainty. And I think that agents could probably start to, where you have a nightmare chain scenario where one end of your chain sort of falls through, we all start scratching around looking for solutions for effectively chain breakers who can step in here and within a reasonable period of time give us a transaction that is going to free up the rest of the buyers and sellers in this chain. Auction could play that role pretty easily from start to finish. So if I threw an auction property at you today, when could I have that in the auction? When could I have that property exchanging?
Okay, then, David. So if you've should we say, had the disappointment of a fall through with a chain, you've got the fall through, you're distressed, the seller is distressed, the buyer has moved on, no longer can't raise mortgage, whatever the case may be. You had that conversation with your client. You can refer the client to us. We'll have a conversation with that client. Now, because you've got that property listed today anyway, because it was under offer, you've got photographs, you've got descriptive notes, you've got floor plans, EPCs, etc. We can list that property today. We can even instruct a legal pack today, and we normally turn a legal pack around within 7 working days. Okay, very, very rapidly indeed. If need be, we could even ramp that up a bit to get that turned around much speedier than that. So that property is legally prepared very, very quickly indeed. But fundamentally, the property can be listed today for auction with people able to go and view as they normally would if it's a private treaty listing, and to bid on at any time from anywhere. Okay, so it can be secured. So if we had that legal pack turned around by Tuesday next week, there's no reason why that property couldn't be exchanging contracts by Tuesday next week. This is where sellers and agents need to understand that we can, on that chain break, using that as an example, we can step in, we can be that solution. And ultimately as well, if we drill down into the detail of a chain break, what tends to happen is, let's say a property's on the market at, I don't know, let's say £300,000, and it was agreed at 285. Given that the vendor is going to be paying the agent a fee, let's say that fee equates to £5,000, give or take. It varies in different parts of the country, of course. That means in reality, the seller's going to be netting out at around about £280,000. So straight away as the auction service provider, we know that the seller would be happy to walk away with 280. But if we could rekindle that sale for them, would they take a little bit less? Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But if they would, we can probably lower that reserve a little bit more. But if not, 280 is real, let's give it a go. Because as far as the greater world public have seen, that property was being advertised at £300,000. They were not aware what that sale was agreed at. So when we set a reserve at 280, we then in auction world have the right, have the ability to market that property at a starting bid. Now that starting bid generally is typically between 7 and 10% below what the reserve is. So all of a sudden we're marketing a property at 255, 260, which yesterday was on Rightmove and the other portals, Zoopla, on the market, booming, etc., at 300,000. So we are making that property stand out even greater than it was.
You're widening that pool of buyers, aren't you? Potentially,
100%, 100%. And also the knock-on effect from that is, speaking from, because we have to be, we're acutely aware that we have a number of customers, our agents, the sellers, and also the buyers. But speaking to sellers, for the agents for a second, if you are making that property price lower, you're going to get more interest, you're going to get more traction, which therefore means that agent is going to be exposed to more applicants, which could be solicitor leads, financial services. They may be a landlord who's got further properties. You're going to have the clamor for people to want to view that property. And if that agent has that conversation with all these applicants, there's so many other outlets there to be tapped into for revenue making, revenue stream, that next potential sale. It's their opportunity to shine as well for a greater wider public.
Taking another sort of auction myth for a second, if I were to sort of say, I have an auction, a property that is perfect for the auction right here, and forgive me, because I know it's your bread and butter, but talking with an agent's hat on for a second,
yep,
I could be forgiven for thinking that the property I'm about to describe is a 2-bed terrace in a sort of rundown part of town. It's boarded up. No, it's unloved. It's had a number of different transactions fall through on it. it is prime investor fodder, and therefore chuck it into the auction because it's a bit too ugly to go on the open market. That's no longer the case. In fact, you've heard some pretty recent successes where auction can actually trump what the agents in a private treaty scenario thought they could achieve.
Certainly have. I mean, you say that. It's interesting you say that because straight away as you're speaking these words in regards to what bucked the trend of what is considered auction or typically auction. Duplex apartments overlooking the Thames. Was it last month, the month before, we sold a beautiful, I want to say a farmhouse. It probably wasn't a farmhouse, but it was a large detached property with swimming pool, etc., in Pontefract, which interestingly the local agents where the seller had valuations on had valued the property at 895. We sold it, and with the fees, actually with the fees included, it was sold for about 930,000. So it went well over what local agents, a number of local agents had valued the property at. It isn't about those boarded up derelict properties, as we said at the outset of this discussion, David. It really is. It's an opportunity to really just open your eyes and your belief into what can sell. It is about selling anything and everything. It's really about making sure that that seller is buying into the auction process because they want something. They, again, going back, without sounding like the broken record, they want that assurance, they want that certainty, they want that security, the transparency. Anything can go. We have, as I said, the duplex. I mean, we sold a couple of duplex apartments recently overlooking the Thames, and they're, topping of £1 million each one. And it goes all over the place. Every part of the country I can think of what can be considered as a glamorous property, which people wouldn't associate with the auction process. But it's back to the agents asking those questions to the sellers. What are you looking for in this house sale? A lot of the time, yes, sellers will say, I want the best price possible because I've got my eye on something else, I'm buying elsewhere or whatever. But sometimes sellers just want that speed and security. That's what they're looking for, and it's just opening up that conversation.
And I think what it comes down to is an agent needs to own the auction process and really sort of have it woven into their service offering, for it to no longer seem like a competing interest to them because they offer it. So it's no longer it's not that fork in the road where a seller can sort of decide, well, do I go to an agent or do I go direct to an auction house? In fact, you can go to an agent and get the best of both worlds. Okay. The other thing that we touched on, and this is more of an education piece really than anything else, is that it sometimes feels counterintuitive for an agent to rock up in front of a seller and say, look, these are all the things that we can offer you. These are what our fees would be in real life. Now, if you go down the auction route, there's nothing for you to pay. And all of a sudden, you're almost sort of setting up a scenario where they can sell their house for free. And that sends off all sorts of like electrical wires flashing in my head that, hang on, this is a threat to your model. This is something else. But in reality, that's what an auction process can deliver for a seller.
Exactly, and this is what we've tried to do. We've tried to tailor a product which is as easy as possible for an agent to peddle in order to sell it to their vendors as an option. So we've made it free. So there's no commissions to pay. There's no estate agency fees, auction fees to pay. As I said before, we can legally prepare every property with a legal pack. Now, there is no upfront charge for that. We can do that free of charge. We can supply a legal pack with no upfront cost. So if the property, for whatever reason, fails to sell through the auction process, the seller does not pay a bean. They can walk away into the sunset. It's not cost them anything. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. The only cost to the seller would be for their legals. And that's the only cost to the seller. And it is one of those things where, because there are no fees to pay, and we all know that, twofold really, we all know that fees in recent years, I mean, there's a lot of property media coverage about how fees have fallen in recent years in regards perhaps the rise of the online agents, in regards to some agents, race to the bottom, etc., on the high street to try and win business. You can outperform any agent you want with 0%. You cannot get lower than, I tell you what, I'll charge you nothing. And your property is going to be legally prepped. For any buyer can do their due care diligence before they even make an offer. And that buyer is going to give you a non-refundable deposit, so they're financially committed. And Mr. Seller, you can also set when you want to move in regards to your completion date. There is so many attributes to the auction process. Unfortunately, some estate agents are unaware of this, and they're probably a little bit fearful, because speaking from my own experience, when I was on the high street, had zero input with auction at all. If somebody said to me, I'm thinking about selling my property for auction, my initial response was, back in the early 2000s, was, oh, your house is far too nice for that. You don't want to be doing that. It's a beautiful house. And now on the other side of the fence, and I can see, as I said earlier, it makes me sometimes scratch my head as to why private treaty still is in existence, because the auction process, if I could flick a switch and everybody now is selling through the unconditional route, or even the conditional route of sale, it would eliminate so many headaches. It would make life easier for so many people, sellers, buyers, and agents alike.
It's funny, because very often you'll hear from sometimes when a buyer's making a bid, they'll use the phrase, listen, I don't want to get involved in a Dutch auction over here, right? And that's one of the phrases that people wheel out time and time. But the reason why people say they don't want to get involved in an auction process is because they know that it is naturally more competitive than the sort of smoke and mirrors world of property negotiation that we have at the moment. So that there is a whole other discussion to be had as to whether or not we as estate agents are anyway doing our duties to the vendors by not disclosing what our offers are and where it's likely to go to. And there's a lot of legal grey areas on that. But with auction, you get that absolute certainty, and that if you are a serious buyer, you seriously want the property and you can bid at that level and you're willing to commit, then I think it really does, it does that job remarkably well of making the buyers not just talk the talk, but they have to walk the walk. So one of my jobs today is, if I get a bid in on a property, and let's say I've got 3 different bids on a property, I need to pick the best offer. Now, the best offer might not be the highest offer. It might be somebody, generally speaking, who I think is going to be able to perform. And that is all based on David Mintz's say-so. So I look at that, I look at your bank statement, and I think, okay, this guy's got enough of a deposit there, he's got an agreement in principle, and I'm having to make some sort of a value judgment. But how many times, agents, have we had the cash buyer that suddenly turns into a mortgage buyer? How many times have we heard from a buyer that they're buying it and they have their deposit set aside, and then all of a sudden we're dealing with negotiating with the bank of mum and dad further down the line, and that dreaded call that comes halfway into a sale where they say, well, yeah, I just need my mum and dad to come and look at the property. And actually that conversation could end up with them walking away and pulling out. So that there is that kind of lack of certainty there, which auction really answers.
It is, and like I said before, you said about the Dutch auction, the sealed bids, best and finals. We've all experienced it. The knee jerk decisions made by Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, where they put an offer in which they've got the buyer's remorse, they've won it, and they think, oh, have we paid too much? And then they start doubting themselves, and all of a sudden you're making that awkward conversation to the seller. Yes, I know, I advise these are probably the best buyers out there, but they've decided to walk away, and then you're back to square one again. We are, as I said, auction is not something to fear. It really is not something to fear. It is something that is to be treated as an ally to everybody, to buyer, to seller, and to agent. It's something to simplify the process. It's something to take away heartache, frustration, agonizing decisions. We could all make informed decisions as professional property people, but one thing we haven't got is the crystal ball. We don't know what's around the corner. And if a buyer does withdraw, there is no financial reward to the seller for the lost time. They're back to square one. We've mentioned at the beginning of this discussion that the market looks like it may be shifting slightly. The pendulum could be swinging. Does it mean there's going to be, because all the fall throughs, because of price reductions you see on the portals at the moment, lots of price reductions, our price is beginning to dip? If a seller loses their buyer today, are they going to achieve the same amount to the next buyer? Maybe, maybe not. You can't guarantee it. Get it sold, get it agreed, get it exchanged. Set the completion date, pack the grand piano, get the bubble wrap out, get the kids out of school into the new school, and get moved. Simple as that. And that's what auction can deliver.
Yeah, well, that's totally true. And I think that when you go and see a seller for the first time and you're trying to get an idea of what's motivating them and what buttons you need to push as an agent, one of the questions that you will be asking them if you're a good agent is there any kind of particular timeline that we need to be aware of? Is there some, so if they turn around to you and go, yeah, look, I found the property in my dreams, but you know, I did have a buyer for this house previously, but it's fallen through. And I just, you know, I don't want to lose the property I'm going to. Well, that's something that motivates somebody. If somebody turns around to you and says, I ideally need to be in that postcode over there by September. Again, those are the things that motivate people. So every seller has a timeline, and perhaps, you know, sellers with all the time in the world and who want to sort of experiment in an uncertain market, they can do. But if you've got somebody who has a fixed time scale in mind, to me, this solves the problem every time.
It doesn't it, and let's be clear about it. Let's you know, have a candid conversation in regards to what auction can do for those individuals who have a strict timeline that they want to work to. You mentioned before, David, about cash buyers in a sort of best and final sealed bid. They may not be the highest offer on the table, but because they're cash, they can stand by a quick transaction time, and I say they'll exchange in 2 weeks, which normally turns into 2 months, but that's another story. What the auction can give is, if you've got a seller who wants that timeline to be met, what is it worth? If their property is worth X, what is it worth to them to go just slightly below X in order to get that timeline met? And when you ask that honest question to a seller, there will be a little bit of give there, because the timeline is the most important factor for them. So we could adjust. It doesn't necessarily mean that the reserve is what they're going to be selling at. It just means there's more flexibility for that seller to find a satisfactory ending sooner rather than later. More often than not, when we have a very attractive reserve on a good property, that reserve will be surpassed easily. So frequently we're witnessing that at the moment, so frequently.
And it's no different to the offers in excess of
exactly
style marketing that you see up and down the country. And the reason that we're using that is we're turning around to vendors and saying, this is a more attractive figure to market your property at, but we don't intend to stop there. If there's sufficient interest, we're going to try and drive it beyond that.
Exactly that. And there's so many gimmicks that the agents use in regards to marketing properties with attractive prices to try and open up more of a buyer's market. You know, the price range of available from 325 to 375, and it's bonkers, isn't it? But we are being more honest with the auction process. And again, it goes back to the fact of the legal paperwork is in place for anybody to inspect. A legal pack is available on our website. Anybody can access the website, even out of our partners, the auction site that we provide for our partners. They can access it from there, click on the link to the legal pack, download the legal pack, read through that, lay in bed at night, read for everything they need, pass it to their solicitor to give it the once over, to make sure there's nothing sinister lurking within the extravagant wording that some of these the title deeds possess. And it just gives so much. As I said, there's that word certainty again for both buyer and seller, and also the agent. This is the thing. And if the agent gets the desired result for that seller, it's the agent, because of that recognition we give to the agent, it's the agent that gets the applause from their client, because they've done what the client has asked them to do, and that's sell their property in the timeline that they've dictated. And more often than not, at the price they want as well, because ultimately that reserve is there. That's what the vendor's looking for. And the property's not sold unless that reserve is met or is surpassed. So we're everyone's happy. That's the thing. Everybody always seems to be happy.
We keep using the word certainty, but obviously, you know, in normal circumstances, that's the one thing we can't guarantee people is certainty of the market in the future in terms of what it's going to be doing, certainty that a sale is going to go through. And you can take all of that anxiety away. And it's not perfect for every seller, and it's not perfect for every buyer, but there are a range of scenarios where it really fits.
The thing is, what I would also add as well is we keep using the word auction, and it is an auction. You know, it is an online auction. Most of our stock now goes through the online auction world. But the phrase I like to use a lot, and I use with our partners, is secure sale. It's about offering a secure sale, and this is exactly what the auction is. It's giving that security. It's giving that commitment. Okay, that word again, certainty, and that is what it is. I say to our agents when you're speaking to sellers, you know, how about our online auction? In a nutshell, it's a secure sale route. That's what it is. Forget the word auction to panic people. Use the secure sale route. We'll have that conversation with your clients and explain how the auction process works, the nuts and bolts, the mechanics, and allay all the fears. Get rid of those myths, get rid of those legends of why you shouldn't go down the auction route and why it's so bad, why it's so horrific, because it's not. It really, really is not.
Fantastic. Richard, thank you very much for your time. It's been a real eye-opener. Thank you.
Thanks, David, for your time as well. Thank you very much indeed.